Go to Volume 1, Shechem Beis, chapter 156. Now it's known that the root of creation is from the level of Zohar Datzilis. Remember that all this that we've been discussing has been, according to the Beer, the explanation of Nagash HaKadosh, that Chayui is energies and Damui are containers. And it's a long discussion on the whole process of creation that allows us to retrace each step. So, briefly, Ihu is the power of Likvul, the power of Gili, expression, reflection of the divine, that unites with Chayui, with all the energies, as they flow all the way down to Ishtalshus, the Ir Pnimi, the immanent energy that will, Ir Chesed, Ir Akura, and so on. Then comes Ihu. The second Ihu is the Keich HaGvul, or the energy as it manifests in the containers now, and are shaped by the containers. That's one with the container. So you have the unity of the container to the energy, and the energy to the higher energy, all the way to Ir HaLikvul. You have let's put that assembly line, a path. At least technically we understand what that means.
Why is
and Maveda will soon understand what it means. Maveda, each level has its own Maveda, how you go from one to the next. You know, for us, being that we're all the way in the bottom of the rung, we have to figure out even just the mere fact to be aware that it's not a Gnostic universe, to be aware that there's a hand inside the glove, and to start climbing. But based on this, hypothetically, we can climb all the way to literally the Kecha Ir HaLikvul Mamash that reveals the divine in full its glory. So each step is necessary to achieve its particular role. The Evdei Hashem Bagufim, those that serve with their bodies, their main thing is to refine the containers. The containers should not be negashim, but should be refined and allow the energy to flow through it. Evdei Hashem and Nishmasim, their main job is to reveal energy, and the containers are more transparent. And obviously, you need the goals to achieve the combination of both. Because you want the containers and the energies all be one with the source of it all. So now, in chapter 156, he's going to reconnect it now to the Pirush of Arizal, that Chayui is Zoh. Chayui is the Gimel Rishenis Mechin, and Gamui are the Kelim. Gamui is the Zayin Tachtein, the Midas. In Yedua, the Sherish is Adus Mechin Zoh Datzilis. Now it's known that the source of creation is from Zoh of Datzilis, that's Zoh Anpin, which is the Midas of Datzilis. The Gimel of the Shenis has a mile name. The Gimel of the Shenis, which is the first, when you say it's often the spheres, one way we define the spheres is the three firsts, and the seven bottom. So sometimes the three first can be Keser, Chochmah, Bina, Kachab. Sometimes it's Chabad. Depends how we count the spheres. So it's called Gimel Rishenish, the first three. And then the Zayin Tachtenis is the seven bottom. So it's 10 altogether. The seven bottom are Chesed through Malchus. Usually you say Zoh. Zoh is usually Chesed through Yisod, but Zoh and Malchus is the seven. Here's talking all sevens. Gimel Rishenish. U'kamayim and Alpayim Shana Kod B'Teira Le'olam. It says 2,000 years the Torah preceded the world. What was 2,000 years? The world was no years then. So the Shehin Alefcha Chochma Alefcha Bina. It means to say Torah is higher than the world. Not preceded in time, preceded in quality. Because Torah comes from Alefcha Chochma, the word Alpayim comes from the word Aleph, the teacher. Alefcha, the teacher of Chochma, and Alefcha Bina. Sometimes Aluf could be also Asad,
general or something.
But here he means from the word Aleph, of the teaching of Chochmah, the teaching of Bina. So Alpayim, two. One is Chochmah, one is Bina. That's higher than Zoh. That's why Kodma Leila. You say this also in the Maimon of Bar Mitzvah. Uksiv, and it says, Hanistonis L'Hashem Elokeinu. What does it mean? It says, V'aniglas Lanu Lubneinu. It says, then the concealed is to Hashem Elokeinu. The revealed is to us and our children. explains, in the Stars Lashon that came, is Chachma Bina. Ain't on the Stars Sadai. The Star is the Chachma Bina, that's why they're still concealed. Because they're beyond existence. The Zayin Tachtenas, the other side, Hey Makar Elamus, they're the root and the source of the worlds. Remember the Rachamim Chasadecha, remember your compassion and your kindness. So we usually be type Kime'elam because they are forever, they're eternal. Here Kime'elam because they're connected to the wealth. This source, this proof he brought earlier, right here at the beginning, actually, if you look at the end of chapter Kuf Nun Aleph, where the whole thing began, the discussion, just a word, it says, the Midrash Shayachim El Ha'elmus, and the Chitzenis means. So remember, with the long discussion about the two types of ill of Olol, cause and effect, Midas and Meichel, so he's bringing this back now to Midas and Meichel. They're going to complain that Meichel is more like Iyu Chayui, and Midas is Iyu Gamui. One's connected to the world, and one is revelation from above. He's going back and connecting that idea. If you remember, that whole thing connected back, Meichel and Midas was coming to explain how Atzilus is for Biyah, or Atzilus is for Atzilus, which was coming to explain the difference in the Ovis and Ante. So there's a flow here. There is a method. Yeah, there's order to this chaos. Well, it's not chaos for us.
Everybody should see yesterday's Wall Street Journal the weekend. So you've got a heart transplant. And the person who gets the heart transplant winds up with traits of the person who's recipient winds up with traits from the donor, a heart transplant.
Wow, let's continue.
It's amazing.
The enterprise is so the Pirkei HaCholos Esau. Pirkei HaCholos is a part of Kabbalah, part of Kabbalah. Esau Shir came to Shal Yetzer Bereshis, Leishlam and Olaf Alofim Parsois, Keminim Berav Keach. Pirkei HaCholos, which means the chapters of the chambers, but it's Pirkei HaCholos is one of the early Kabbalistic works. What is only Shir Kema, he says like Shir Kema, which is like the structure. The type of David. Pirkei HaCholos, I think it was. Maybe it's not that. No, it's from the Zayar's times. Pirkei HaCholos goes back, I think that the secret is Musa, it's connected to
Russia.
Yeah. It's Zil HaMalach, let's say. Shir Kema Shal Yetzer Bereshis. What Shir Kema? Shir Kema means the structure, the measure of the structure, the measured structure. When we say Shir Kema of a human being, say it's 5 feet, 6 feet. It's parameters. The parameters of Yetzer Bereshis, of the structure of creation, is 236 alofim parsais. 236,000, what do they call parsais in English?
Parsais, formulas.
About hand breadth.
No, that's how.
That's how.
Parsais formula.
It's like 4 kilometers, 2.6 miles.
No.
3,000.
A person walks in a day a certain amount of parsos. 10 parsos. 10 parsos.
4
That's
meals
it?
in an hour.
Yeah, it
It
can be.
takes around a little less.
How long is a meal? A meal is what? How many?
Meal is
3,000.
How many hours is a meal?
A meal is it's a little less than a mile. That's what it's called.
Yeah, 3,000. John, 3,000 feet.
There's
a
a
little more than a half.
2,000. It's about 2,000.
About 3,000 feet.
Okay, so that's
It's a
that's
kilometer.
So
A
that's
meal is a kilometer
Yeah,
around.
a little less.
Which is 0.6
A
kilometers.
mill's a half
It's
a
four
A
times.
half of a kilometer.
So
Half
that's
Meal
Mill's
is
a half a kilometer.
so 4 times 0.7 be 2.8
quarter
miles.
kilometer.
So 2.8 miles times 236,000.
That's pretty great. That's the size of the, what is it? The size of the globe, of the universe? What is
The
it?
Yetzer Bereshis, whatever Yetzer Bereshis is.
We don't know what that is right now. I'm saying in this line.
It's probably not a physical measurement.
It says this is Zod Atzilus. Yetzer Bereshis is Zod Atzilus.
So this is Yetzer Bereshis. Yetzer Bereshis means that, it says also there's 500. No, it takes 500 years from one heaven to the next. So what does that mean? Not so simple with that. What means a heaven? You have to define what a heaven is.
Okay. I didn't mean to.
Anyway, the point is, no, it's fine. The bottom line is that there's some type of fundamental structure to Yetzer Bereshis. It's called 236,000 parsecs. What would that be? Calculate that. 2.8 times 236,000
What's 2.8?
miles.
Oh.
Approximately. Well, 236 times 2, 236 times 3,
miles. It's like 0.4 miles.
36.
800,000 miles.
What do you say, 2.8?
What's 800,000 miles from here? How
How
far
far
is
away?
it from Earth?
250,000.
So it's like the sun.
That's not much further. 92 million miles away.
What is 400,000 miles?
No, 200 something.
No, 250,000.
By the way, this is only
Yeah,
700,000.
that's not wrong anyway. It's like- it's
236
like
times
4
3.
miles or something like
Minus 0.2.
that. It's a few thousand.
No, it's just
Passes First we can walk 10 passes.
236.
About 10 hours walking, and it's
Right,
4
40
miles to an hour usually.
Oh,
660,000. Up to 660,000 miles.
Okay, we gotta figure it out. Okay. Kaminyan v'rav kayach. The gematria of a rav kayach. So kayach is 28, 202, 236, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
V'rav kayach is 236. You do it, the Yetzer Bereshis Hainu Zod Atzilus, and so Yetzer Bereshis is Zav Atzilus. It's the structure of Zav Atzilus. Final Lefisha B'chin Zod Atzilus, Zav B'chin Samitzir Sheh Atzilus. Why is that? Because the level of Zod Atzilus, that's the Mitzias of Atzilus. If you want to know the structure of Atzilus, as we spoke before, the structure, V'hu'in Gamuhi, that's the skeleton, the structure of Atzilus. That's Yetzer Bereshis, and that's Zav. Not that the Midas. The Gimel Rishenus is higher than that. Like it says this time now he's going back to the Arizal. The Garmui is Zayin Tachtenis. And he's actually reconciling it now. Why? Because the Kalim that he's been talking about that create existence. So where are the Kalim primarily? In Zah. So it's reconciled. Some places, the Arizal and the Rebbe are not seen as reconcilable. They're seen as two separate interpretations. Like some places in Maimorim it says that according to the Arizal, even the Kalim, even the Eris of Zah are also Gamuri. According to Alter Rebbe, the Eris are always Chayui, even of Zah. Here he's interpreting it not that way. And then according to Alter Rebbe, even the Kalim of the Gimel Rishenus would be Gamuri. According to the Arizal, the Kalim of Gimel Rishenus would be Chayui. But here he's explaining
that this is good. That's Chayoi is also Kalim from Atzilus.
Chayui is not Kalim, Chayui is Eris.
The level of Atzilus. Oh, so he said Gimel Hashem is also Gamai.
The Israel says Gimel Rishenus is Chayui, the Alter Rebbe says Gimel Eris is Chayui. So they could either reconcile them or you could see them as two separate interpretations. Here he's reconciling. You understand that? There's two ways to go here. Here he's saying that Zah is Garmuhi, is Kalim. That's the Kalim, the structure. But Inyan Mu, the Inyan of this is the Yitzav Eitz Chaim. No, it says in Eitz Chaim, the Yisav Zah, we give him Madregas. New subject now. Eitz Chaim, it says the creation of Zah comes from give three levels. The Hein Eris, the Tzutzim, the Kalim. Sometimes you'll see Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Nun Chof, is a Shar Anach. In Eitz Chaim, that's the Rosh Hashanah, the acronym of Eris, Tzutzis, Kalim. What is the difference? Eris means energies, and the Tzutzis are sparks, Kalim are containers. Kulam Hein B'chinas the Teil. And all of them come from the level of Teil. Let me just see one thing, if you don't mind.
It says here, it says, mass is 3.84 or
1 kilometer. Here it says
3.84 and 4.6 kilometers.
A mil is 1 kilometer.
Between 2.4 and 2.8 miles.
How much? 2.4 to 2.8?
So we said it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we used the biggest one.
So then they need to do something, multiply that by 236,000.
A mil, yeah.
It's most likely a kilometer.
Kilometer, here it says a kilometer. Look it up.
No, he says it's 2.4, 2.8 miles.
Yeah, that's like.
No, a meal. A meal is a kilometer.
I know, I'm talking about a
Right.
person now.
Okay.
Oh,
Parsons, 4 meal.
Which comes out to 660,000 miles.
Plus, 660 to 800.
Right.
But
I'm
if
trying to
it's
think how it relates to the 5, it says between every Rakia is
500,
Yeah,
no,
how
500
How long does it take to
years.
travel a mile?
One pass is about 4 kilometers.
Not miles, the years.
500 years.
So light years, what does that mean, years? We don't even know what years.
500 years.
Like travel of years. How fast you travel? You walking or you flying?
No, it says mahalach. It says mahalach
Right,
tachuf.
Mahalach of Kufshan.
So that's walking.
No, no. How far can you walk in 500 years?
Let's start now. We'll find
Yeah,
out.
let's try different vehicles.
One parson's around 4 kilometers.
Yeah, but
it says
what
here.
the important thing here is that there should be some meaning to 660,000 miles away from here. That figure should mean something.
That's why I asked how far is the sun?
No, but this is Zion.
The sun.
The sun is 2 million.
Billion, I think.
It takes 8
9
minutes.
billion, I think.
8 minutes from the sun. No. 8 minutes times.
That's 180,000.
8 minutes times the speed of sight. Speed of light.
176,000.
Again,
That's the distance.
it's 386,000.
It's 8. I might have got wrong.
Speed of light is 180.
6,000 miles per second. Times 60.
Or 300,000 meters per second.
But why?
That's
But
minute.
why? If it's
That's
Yoy
the time
Tebereshis, if
Okay.
it's Zion, if
Okay,
it's
let's continue.
Oh,
Zada,
here it is. This is how far it is. It's
Yeah.
89 million miles. 90 million miles away.
Okay, so it's completely different.
No, I thought it was 9 million miles.
90 million miles. Just do it.
99.
90 million?
I don't know if that's correct. I think it's
Yeah, no.
I think it's more like 2.4.
Google it. It'll take you 1
The
second.
distance of the Earth
That's
is
right,
sun.
distances, yeah.
90 million miles. Just say this
Okay.
is our.
Let's go. Kulam Chinistan, they're all from Teva. The Eidos and the Eidos Shinistal. So 3 things happen now in Teva. The Eidos, the Eidos Talmud. So in Teva, when the container is shattered, so think of it like this. Think of it like practically liquid inside containers, or energy inside containers. That's it. So what happens? The container shatters. The energy nostalgic expires, leaves. The tzutzis, the sparks, in the tzutzis esh nishru b'shivir hakel. They are the sparks of light that remain in the broken shards. So in the broken shards, you have sparks. The kelim has shivir hakelim, and the kelim are the actual broken shards. Shenaflu that fell, umehem nivna binyan hazah. That fell, and from them became the structure of zah. So here we go. So Zoh has, in other words, Zoh is made up of 3 things. There's the energies that expired. They didn't end up as Zoh, but they're hovering, I guess. Then there's the sparks inside the shards, and then there's the shards themselves from which Zoh was built. Let's continue, we'll see where he's going here. You do it, the spirit of the is Dover, it's known, the spirits of Teyu are basically have a Yevasiyas Dover. They are of substance, a type of yeshus, a type of sense of self. Zayin, I'm not Emlech. I will rule.
Rain.
I will rule. I will reign. So there's an I there. Obviously, it's not a human ego. It's not an ego of it, but it's a sense of self-importance. Even their bittul, even their subjugation. Is not completely setting themselves aside toward the true purpose. Because the world was not created for Toyu, it was not created for chaos, for this world. El Shabbat, but in order to civilize it, to settle it.
It's like Leila Toya, but Hashem didn't create the world for the end of Toya.
Exactly, that's what he's saying, yeah. That's what he wants to say. That means, that the bittul is not Mitzvah Kavanah. Because the Mitzvah Kavanah is not Toyu. The Kavanah is...
Even the bittul Shabbatai.
Well, the Chenkish is not speaking lo yochel akelim nisva, and that's why when they manifest and they enclose themselves in containers, the kelim containers could not contain them.
What does that mean? If it's a oil, it's a toyo, the visual should be very strong.
Oh, they had but not for the Kavanah, which is Hashem. Each one wanted it dominant.
But they are opposed.
But they didn't want to work together for the Kavanah Aliyana. Kavanah Aliyana should be there to take.
What was missing that they got such high wheels?
It's like the Talmid of Rabbi Kiva. Each one said his that it was the only one.
Missing was bittul.
So it's like,
But what does it mean that even the bittul shalom?
Well, Rabbi's question is, how can you say there's no how there's lack of bittul in oros of total? Such a high level. That's the point.
No, but the words over here are mafila bittul shalom
It's
shalom.
a bittul, but it's the wrong bittul.
right, it's a bittul to what
It's
it
a
was created.
bittul, but it's the wrong bittul.
You cannot tolerate something different.
Well, right, because they thought that that's the command of God, is that they should rule, that each one is right.
Who is this day you refer
No,
to?
each of the spheros. Each sphere, but he should rule.
But that's the bigger question. Whether the spheres have their own independent interests.
It seems like that was.
That's the question. It looks like this. Tayu is alluded to in the Pasha Vayishlach when it talks about the Malachim, Malchus Edom, Malchus Sayed, Ev Sayed. So it talks there about Vayimlach, Vayimach, Vayomach, Vayimach, Vayomos. So there's seven kings there. And 10 actually, but 7 that's Vayimach, Vayomos. That refers to called the Beres, the Teo. The Yomos is the Shur Sakel. And so the root, right? And there's the flame achbechel. So I'll tell you that precedes Tikkun. So the children of Esav were powerful, but it was unbalanced. There was a gevura, a lot of power there, a lot of intensity. Ishmael Chama, but there was not balance. That's the pasuk. What is it in Ruchnis? In Ruchnis, obviously, is far more subtle, because there's no independent, there's no Esav, like there's no. You have like this. After the Tzimtzum, the way I always explain it, after the Tzimtzum, you have an imbalance going on. There's like you need a market correction. That's what they use. It's a market correction. Because after the Tzimtzum, everything is concealed in order for creation to begin. And it's like the early stages of creation, so you have a lot of intense energy. Initially, there's only one keli. It's called akudim. Think of it like one cell before it splits. A child was conceived. So everything is in that seed. It's very, very intense. Because everything that will come out of it is in there. Then the seed begins to multiply. The cells begin to split. So now this is where it manifests. But in the early stages, the energy is far more powerful than the containers. And that's where Toyu becomes an imbalance. There's an imbalance going on. See, in Akudim, there's no break, there's no shattering because the energies are all into one container. There's nothing to break. So little. It's all energy almost. But once you start splitting and this starts becoming containers, the containers are very, very, very fragile. Fragile. Which is like what the Yaakov says to Esav, that the children are young, the sheep are tender, same rakis.
Like a chick hatching in it.
Right, so they're very vulnerable, very fragile.
But later on, we'll reach that seer.
And very fragile, and as such, there is this imbalance causes the shattering of the shattering of the containers. So remember, this is not a physical thing. Not even it doesn't happen in time. It's happening right now as well. It's a constant process. It's a constant process in every situation. It's almost like every time there's a market correction in our lives. Let's say adolescence. You're growing into an adult, but you don't yet have the kalim of an adult. You already have more energy and less kalim. There's going to be an outburst. It's every time when there's an imbalance between, or something happens, anger. I'm talking about, there's going to be an imbalance where there's no real harmony and balance between container and energy. You'll have this situation. The person has a lot of, let's say, energy, they have nowhere to express it. So there'll be some type of explosion. So that's essentially the idea of Torah. It's basically a necessary step when there's an imbalance. Because if you didn't have that,
We use some gases.
that's why I said it's market correction, and it's a type of like a reality check. It's a market correction to straighten things out that are imbalanced. It's like saying there's something going wrong. It's like someone puts too much of something, substance in your body can't contain it, it's going to spit it out. It may make you throw up, it may make you expel it in some way. So Toyu is a step, it's actually a healthy step. It's Seisar Amnasluitness. It's to break down in order to rebuild. So it's a world of Kedusha. It's not a negative world, it's not a world of Ra. But he speaks about it in personal terms because it comes from the Pasuk, Emlech, that's the kings. So what is it in its root? It's the energies are very intense. The containers are not really there able to contain them. So you have an explosion. You have a shattering. The energies expire. Talmidei Rebbe Akiva, they weren't mature enough. Because of their intensity, they destroyed each other.
But the energy is a positive thing.
I just said it's a Kedusha world of Kedusha. Toyu is a world of Kedusha.
How
No
could
clip
the son,
yet.
how could the sons of Esau be Kedusha?
The root. Esau, it says, is rooted in Eretz Toyu. That's why Yaakov wanted to give him the brothers.
Higher than Yaakov.
The problem is, it wasn't harnessed by him. You need, again, Garmui, he was like a Chayui, you need the Garmui, you need the containment of it. Or else it's too intense. It's like giving, the people that burned out, Nadav and Avihu, the three that went into the paradise that couldn't make it. These were all Shviris HaKelim examples. Their bodies could not contain the energy. On the Havdul, the 60s, you have the Jimi Hendrixes, Janis Joplins, etc. Jim Morrisons. These are people who have energy. You can't contain it.
And what's this opposite when you have too little energy and not enough?
That's already a world of clip, a real clip. That's
Pure
the world of
materialism.
negative.
That's Marx.
Materialism.
That's
Materialism. That's our lower world. That's where we have here. The containers are so powerful you barely can see energy. That's the different reality completely. But Toyu, the antithesis to Toyu, its alter ego is Tikkun, where the energies come and there's a balance. The energies are not as
In the
intense,
Tikkun, the Oros
and the
Hateo.
containers are more mature.
Oros Hateo.
So what happens if a teacher starts teaching ideas? An example of Toyu would be the teacher teaching ideas and overwhelming students, confusing them.
Like now.
Another example would be rain. The rain is formed instead of raindrops, but buckets, flooding the fields instead of nourishing them. It's any type of flow that is imbalanced. So that's what it comes down to. And it's a part of the process because we live in an imbalanced world. So Toyu leads to Tikkun. So Toyu, the examples of each energy is very self-contained. They don't have the ability to appreciate each other because they're so intense in their own world. That's like the Talmidei students of Rabbi Akiva. Each was great, but they didn't have the maturity yet to coexist with each other. It's complementation. It's the idea of being able to collaborate, to scholarless, what we call as scholars, interconnectivity. Think of your body, God forbid, if all parts of your body decided each one to start ruling without coordinating with others. That's Toyu. That's Toyu. But there's a result from Toyu. Three things happen. The energies expire, the sparks remain hidden somewhat in the shards that are the broken shards, and the shards themselves build tikkun. They build Zohar Atzilus.
Why do you need it?
And Aved, just explain that length why we need it. You know what the market correction is? Why do you need to throw up when you eat something wrong? Because if you don't throw it up, it's going to destroy you. It's a correction to balance things out.
You cannot do it.
But what did it, yeah, I think his
Well,
question
see,
is,
look
what
at
did
the body.
it
Why do we
add,
expel
what
some-
did it
some-
add to
overwhelming?
creation?
Huh?
His question is not what it needed, what did it add to creation?
Things are not working. You want someone to
I don't know,
protest.
why,
Things right now, the world looks like it's working. Sometimes breaking down things is a sign that it's a
not
revelation.
sure.
You know, ideas have not You know the word denial? The very word, when you use the word denial, denial, psychological denial is when a person does not deny there's a problem. Knowing there's a problem is usually very shocking and like a shvius hakeh, but it's the beginning of healing. So without that, it's like saying, how could you heal if you don't know that there's something broken? If you think you're fixed, when you're really broken, big problem. This world is a broken world, not a fixed world. So how could you ask me such a question? Without tell you, we live in a false reality. Everybody has elements of that. You convince yourself everything is good when it's not.
He's saying the process of creation, what would happen if the Taika gun said to take
I told you there's a symptom, there's a major concealment. So as the development goes, there has to be a certain market correction to protest and to let us know that there's an imbalance here. Why do we have to have adolescence? And any transition from one stage to another needs a reminder, needs something to align. You'll see that in any situation, I could call it a market correction. What's a market correction? Things are rolling, and then because things are not, you need something to correct it. And that correction is going to always be a little painful. It's a transition.
Right. The famous story wasn't the Frierdiker Rebbe that got so sick when he became the Nazi. And
The Rebbe Chover wrote
said that it was he was becoming his king was becoming
was like he wrote Al Pi Halacha. You have to have typhus is white heat, the high fever. So white heat is necessary to kasher something. You need to make it red hot, white hot.
It would be annual nutritious.
That's what the Rebbe Chover wrote.
That's it, yeah.
Lipun Gomer, what did he write?
He wrote a whole thing Al Pi Halacha. I make a daily chodesh.
Do we see it by other Rebbeim also? Not
In
as
some way, maybe some
Right.
more apparent than others.
That's why,
Always
maybe
repeat
why
that.
they all in grad try to become rabbis so fast.
Okay, so he says so. So now he speaks in personal terms, more like an avodah. What's the avodah? I know emlich. It's a sense of self. Obviously, there's no self there in that sense, but there's a sense of instead of it being completely aligned. I was tell you, on its own is a lot of energy. Containers are very small, so that type of existence is not what God wants. Let the tell you about it. He doesn't want to have intense energy that can't be contained in containers. He wants to have a structured existence that balance, harmony. That's what he said. That's why when these energies who are focusing more on their own intensity are not able to, when they manifest again, they cannot be contained. And that's why Binyan Hazah, which comes from Tayu, is also Mitzias Dover. But now it's already Mitzias Dover that it's also existence, it's going to create existence, but it's an existence that now can be built. Because the energy is not that intense. He's bringing a proof from Eitz Chaim here that the Garmui of that the creation of existence that he's been talking about till now, containers, are primarily Zah, where existence matters. Higher than Zah, like he said, Chachma Bina is Alav Chachma, they're before the world, they're higher than existence. Midas is as a relationship. Remember, we learned this earlier, and I was probably going to say it soon again. Personally speaking, in faculties, when a person is consumed with their mind, intellect by nature is isolated from anybody else.
going out of himself?
You're going inside yourself, right, within. And any other person, even a student, is confusing them because you're going inward into understanding something. So two things that distinguish Moichin and Midas. There's a few chapters back. Moichin is number one, very isolated, inward, and not related to another. Midas, on the other hand, is only when there's another. You feel for another, you care for another. The midah to be fulfilled, you need another person to receive. Moichin is the opposite. Anything other is confusing and distracting. The second thing is, he said, Moichin is no spirals. Moichin does not have excitability, not emotional, it's not subjective. It's purely the concept itself. You're absorbed by it. Midas is all about personal. I like, I don't like, I'm attracted, I'm repelled. So that's rooted in Elokus is also two dimensions. How God is removed from other, meaning removed from existence. That would be like God, the artist as he is before he's creating the art, so to speak, like Iyu v'chayu ichad, that's Oyer, but it's, in this case it's the Gimel Rishenis. Alefcha, that's why it's Kod Melayla. God in his mind, the Torah is before the world. The Torah will be sent into the world to help transform it, but it itself precedes the world. And then there's the instruments of the artist that he goes and shapes his art. And that's the Kelim or Midas. That's God relating to us. He loves us, he cares about us, he wants us.
But according to
Is that starting with
So
Kesser,
Midas of
starting
Atzilus are rooted in Tayu. So Tayu, the energy is so self-oriented that it shatters. But what remains when it comes into Atzilus is the still sense of self, there's a Mitzias, Like Akudim, for example, is just pure air. Pure air is completely selfless. Here you have a combination of of substance that become midas, but now in Tikkun, as opposed to Tayu, it's subsided, it's tamed. And therefore, it can become the beginning of existence. But you need to think about something. You need to have substance.
But in
This actually also explains that Tayu has another purpose. It begins to create substance. It begins to create a sense of self. But it's still imbalanced there. It would be like, you know what, like a child growing up and suddenly, when children start having, you said, terrible twos or whatever, what really is going on? They're starting to sense themselves independent. But they don't know how to express it. They're not balanced, right? So they're challenging, they're experimenting. People should know this. I mean, children, that's what children do. They're experimenting with their independence, and they don't know how to do anything because they don't have rules yet. So they lash out, tantrums, anger. This is not a bad thing. It's not like they're bad. It means, actually, I wouldn't call it terrible twos. I'll call it Toyodika twos. That's a better word. It's necessary because what happens? You adjust. Here, no, listen, doctor. You adjust in your mother's womb for 9 months. The first few months of your life, you're completely protected by others. Now suddenly you start developing a sense of self. Look, one day this sense of self is going to be completely independent. So there's going to be a clash here. Here you're so dependent on your parents, everybody else, and now you're starting to sense the beginnings of you, me. They say by age 2 or 3, there's a sense of self as independent of others. So it has to have that transition has to have a type of lashing out. Because am I part of you? Am I not part of you? Unfortunately, this goes on all our lives. There's still people at 80 years old are still figuring out what to do with their umbilical cord.
Having toilet tooth.
It's around their neck, metaphorically. Their people's mothers and fathers haunt them from the grave also, or from heaven, forever. My point is that there is so it's a natural thing. So now I realize there's another thing Tayu does. It starts creating a sense of self. However, in Tayu, it's too much energy, too little contained, there's nowhere to balance it. In Tikkun, this sense of self becomes the midas that begin the beginning of a self-oriented existence. But remember, it's still in a very subtle form. I'm sure in chemical reactions, even in the development of a fetus, you'll find when the cells break, they're split, there has to be an element of a shvira there too. Because as they're splitting, it's time to become separate. There has to be almost like a friction, right? The tension that precedes the harmony. It has to be that way. It's like when, it's like baby teeth fall out, the new teeth. There's a certain pain, there's a transition. There's always transition when the old gives way to the new. It has to be. Or else it's not new. That's the whole point of something new. That's something,
There you go, the old.
it's it's about transition. I think Tayu Tikkun is a very
There's always a pain involved.
model of real transition.
You just pointed new concept, cellular pain. Proceeding.
But it has a physical effect on the mother's body.
But I did want to ask you a question. In your analogy with the artist, you said that when he's thinking of it, just in Makshava, in the Chachma Bina, can't he be, before he comes to Canaan, which was said in Midas, can't you say that he can be excited about he has a concept of what he's going to do?
You want to
There's
give
Kesser,
Midas.
No,
Didn't you just say there's no spirals in Makshava?
Yeah, but he can have
Eliezer, you were Mechabit or Rebbe Rasha. Very good. If you were here when you learned it, he actually discusses that at length. We're talking here Moichin Be'etzem. Then there's Moichin Midas Sheba Moichin. It's true. The next step after Moichin in its purest form is all internal. But then comes a stage where you call it Midas Sheba Moichin. It's exactly what you just said. It's the excitability in the mind. Like you're excited about an idea, for example. But that's always a step outside of the idea. Because when you're really absorbed, you can't get the excitement. And then, not only excitement of the idea, then he also said there's inclinations in the mind that begin leaning toward chesed or gvura. He discusses this at length.
Yeah.
This was the major point of
step,
the other Samantha. Yeah. So what you're saying is, and those midas shebemeichem will become meichel shebemidas, which will mature the midas, and then it becomes real. This was Yisrael Zuta, Yisrael Samafuna, and Avi Milah. This is the whole point of what he's doing. What you're saying is exactly, but I was just saying in the purest form before we get to the breakdown. Remember, Moichin, Aleph Chacham Torah, Aleph Chacham Chacham Bina are going to impact midas. It's not just. But initially, it's here that you have to always think of this. First, study the parts. Then they begin to work with each other.
There's also an aspect of
Like once you're seeing the machine once it's all put together. But when you break apart a machine, you want to really understand each part, each component as it stands on its own. Yeah, this is interesting, very, this video piece. So it's Sears David, I never thought of it, I never heard of it this way. Sears, I'll tell you, was actually the beginning of the Sears. So it's interesting, so the Anah Emlech of the Malchi Esav, that's why they were necessary. Because they created the Sears, even though it was Yomos. And that laid the ground. It's like, you know what, it's like, they say by World War II when they landed at Normandy. So the first soldiers that jumped off, that went over the ships, they were like too far from the beach. They drowned. But they became the stepping stone that everyone else walked upon.
Really?
I'm not saying that's exactly a good example, but it's something like that. God forbid no one should die for anyone else, but it means to say that sometimes you need, like, that there's a so-called a sacrificial lamb or whatever. The price of becoming an entity is going to have a casualty or two. So that's taka why. Like he says in Parsha Vayeshev, Rashi says that's like to say this in the offer. The first, why is not why is
There's no made of them.
yeah, like,
From Seattle.
yeah. It's like a proceeding and tell you very interesting. See it done.
What was that last part?
Just Vayeshev, this is Vayishlach, and then Vayeshev, Rashi says, why do we talk about the Malchi Esav, families of Esav, Aluf Esav before Yaakov? He
He
says
said a lot of time.
Because, go ahead.
this is an example of take a lot of earth to get the diamonds out.
Sifting.
Yeah,
Somebody lost a diamond in the sand, so you have to go through a lot of sand to get to the diamond.
But the muscle could be this almost derogatory. Here it's not that way. The sand is actually part of it's like a part of the process. Look, later on, at the end of this volume, there's going to be a long discussion on Teyul. Haveda, unbelievable parts. We learned that already many months ago. It talks about the Zen, not the Zen, the Midas Day, 4 different dysfunctionalities.
Yeah.
So Teyul is a dysfunctional state, a spiritual dysfunctional state, but a stepping stone. I think it's a very healthy entry. Teyul, I could see Teyul being also a stage where, let's say, somebody, I don't mean this in any personal way, but somebody, let's say, was not into Yiddishkeit and then comes into it. There's always going to be the growing pains. Initially, they're super firm. Then they find their balance because they're not yet, they're not integrated yet. Integration is far more complicated. When 2 worlds clash, there's going to be a clash, exactly. And sometimes you go more extreme. You never went through that? Okay, good.
The super firm
No,
part?
maybe you did go, you just never came out of it.
He says he just eased right into it.
Right.
I did.
You became a fanatic and stayed one.
He had to say that.
No, and I'm not suggesting that. No, but I see it sometimes, and I see it why also, because the person who's learning new things, they're being extra careful to know what to do, what not to do. They're not as, they're not attuned yet, so it's a certain sense, it's a sensitivity, but it's not necessarily them yet. I've seen this many times, and I see the problems involved, frankly. I see a lot of other children. For that matter, firm people have different problems. They're mechanical in the first place. But there are those that adapt that don't always own it. And many become almost infantilized, run into mashpia when they don't need to. And everything becomes like someone else is going to take care of you because they feel ignorant. And, and I understand that. Obviously, you may not have the knowledge someone else has, but you're still an adult. I've seen this. I've counseled many couples, telling them that you got to work it out yourself. You don't go to a rabbi for everything. And there's times you go. You have to know when, yeah, when not. It may not really. Then you have to know, Manila Atzmi, but everybody has this. But sometimes when you're extra sensitive, out of humility, you go because you don't know. I don't know. And I remember Pesach, I was talking at one of the talks I gave. There's a lot of, there were all kinds of interesting people there, but I asked, how many of you feel responsible to influence other Jews, inspire other Jews that come your way? And very few raised their hands. And one of them said, we're not professionals. These are professional organizations for this. I'm not criticizing them, that's how they were educated. Professional organizations who really dedicate their time. We're busy with our lives, I didn't really debate because I needed to educate them. It wasn't about mustering them, So, I gave an example. I said, what happens if you sit in the airplane with somebody and there's nowhere to go? It's like, that's where you're sitting. Would you talk to that person? Do you not? And then I told them professionals. We always remembered that the Titanic was built by professionals. The Ark was built by amateurs. I don't know if you should be relying on professionals. The Mikada. But that's how their concept was. And I said, what happens if you feel they're your own brothers and sisters? You think differently, right? Well, the point I was making was that they say, I don't know how to answer a person's question, so I defer to someone else. Obviously it bothers me because I was saying, listen, you may not be the biggest expert or the biggest scholar. You know how to speak kindly to your child, or you send your children to an expert to talk because you're an amateur parent.
So I'll need to teach all.
What you as a parent can give, no expert could ever give. Obviously, if you need this a special assistance, it's one thing. But there's a certain element of love, you know. I mean, my point is that it comes down to almost like a misplaced humility, where but it comes from the place where a person has not really owned Yiddishkeit. So they're very comfortable with what they have. Therefore, they don't know how to deal with a situation that's out of the ordinary, natural. You know, I'm sitting with another Jew on a plane. It's completely not like me. Do you have anything to talk about? So I once was teaching a group of soccer guys. They were like really interested. So what do you? So I said, next time you're on a plane, find the person near you, see if they're Jewish. They told me they had nothing to talk about. The only thing you can talk about is business, or that we could always talk about the weather or sports. She said they can't. And Yiddishkeit they can't talk about because the Yiddishkeit is so distant, it's so self-oriented. They say, why am I going to tell them? Should we wear strimal? Understand what I'm saying? And they said, what would you say? I said, talk about family. They don't have a natural ability to do so because they don't really own the Yiddishkeit. It's not really theirs. It's just mechanical. Yeah, and it's very unnatural. Any type of natural conversation doesn't happen. You know, we're trained. I mean, around here, even someone who's not a great educated guy by osmosis, there's a certain message of being nice. You're kind. How are you? The kids you have, come over for Shabbos, something like that. That's a natural thing. I mean, I'm going off track a little. I just wanted to give an example of integration. Tzilus is Tikkun is integration. Toyu is too self-absorbed, but it does create a sense of self, which brings the Hedis Mitzvah Dover. What's interesting is that there's three elements. There's the Eidos that are expired, there's the Nitzutzes that are in the shards, and there's the shards themselves. It doesn't go into those three things. I guess those three things is what help develop the personality of Zohar. Yeah.
Well, it's mainly the shards, no?
Yeah, but it has to have energy. It can't just be. He doesn't speak the details. It would just be fascinating to know how it's like the development of the self.
You say like broken pieces of
Shivrei HaKelim, the broken parts.
But the broken.
Are the broken meters?
Right. No, what it means is, look, it's not physical broken. It's like, let's put it this way. I mentioned, let's say, the teacher.
Shards are the Gashmis that we felt this morning.
He says,
No,
here he says it's Kelim of Zohar.
It's the meters.
He was not talking about
Eventually it
Breaking of the
became,
meters.
and then through Zah it
Meters
became
broke.
creation.
The Midas, but not here saying the Kingdom also.
Well, the
It
meters
hasn't even the binyan has
meters,
Zohar. That's what
meters
he
is the
said.
Kalim of Tzilus.
Binyan of Zohar. The structure of Zohar, yeah.
Which is the Shari Shabbos.
Well, physicality of this world is the broken shards.
That's not discussed here.
That's not here.
It's a separate discussion. That's not, I wouldn't confuse that. He wants to bring up the different points here altogether. He's talking here far more in the earlier Genesis
Last
of it all.
in the beginning.
Yeah, so the thing I would say is the breaking. See, when we think of breaking, something is broken, you just throw it out. You know that the Aron had also the broken luchos,
Put it into that.
right? So it doesn't have, it's not worthless. Not that, in the context of like how we explain it psychologically, I guess, if a teacher taught and overwhelmed the students go away completely confused. So the container is broke to some extent, okay, they're broken. But you could say that later, years later, they'll learn it better, they'll remember and say, that was what I heard. So it's not like the broken shards have no value. It's just that right now it's completely.
Don't we say the only way to really reach God is to have a broken heart? Doesn't it say that?
Okay, yeah. It says that, but that's a different point. That's not it.
That's humility.
It's a broken heart.
But that's not what he wants to say.
There's
No.
an energy hidden in the
No, we're
shards.
talking here that the broken piece
back to-
itself
Has the energy.
has something in it to help you
It
build.
could be recreated, basically.
Yeah.
You're talking in general. The idea, of course, that something has to break in order to be complete. That's not what he's talking about here. I wouldn't bring that here.
Godly energy is in each shard.
In general, you could say, yes, the breaking of something, breaking of the Beis Hamikdash helps us aspire to the next. But that's in general. But I was talking more the breaks of the pieces can be built So it's like something like when you rebuild a building from the broken parts of an older building, for a better building, but you're still using the broken parts. And you're just making them stronger. Anyway, I just wanted to, okay, fine. V'agam v'chol she'el matikin l'mashin nisakin b'chinas l'teyu. He's asking a question. Even though the general world of Tikkun is what it appears from the world of Teyu, K'meshikos Eitz Chaim, he says in Eitz Chaim, Kol Mokim, how do you do it? Ashviyah Heirak B'Zayim Tachtenis, will they begin with the Shems? What's the question? The question is, I have to read more. We'll read more, we'll figure it out. Nevertheless, it's you do it's known that the breaking in Teyu happened only in the Zayin Tachtenis. In the lower 7 emotions, related Gimel Shems, and not in the top 3.
Because he just finished saying that happened only in the Zion Independence, and here we know from other places that's the close. I don't think the whole thing, I don't think including the dimension. That's the question.
So it was not that, again, I understand, that making the question. Okay. So he says the binyan of Zohar is from Tayu. That's why it's Mitzias David, that's clear. Moichin, in other words, is beyond. Because he's asking L'chei what he's saying, which seems right.
What?
That the whole Elam HaTikkun, not just Zohar, also Chabad, also Chochmah Bina of Tikkun, the Mashnetakim, also came from Tayu. Mashnetakim is what was repaired from Tayu. Which he just said that Tayu was a Mitzias. And that's why it shattered. And that from that was built the containers of Zohar, was built from those broken containers, Zohar, and that's why Zohar is a Mitzias. What are we doing with the Gimel Rishonos of Atzilus? That's beyond it all. But we also know that the whole Tikkun, also the Gimel Rishonos, came in reparation of Tayu. So his answer is very simple. Yeah, the Gimel Rishonos of Atzilus is connected to the Gimel Rishonos of Tayu. There was no Shvira there, so there's no sense of self there. That's what his answer. Okay. But you do the Shvira Rak B'Zayim Takman B'Kum. But Bina Hoya Shvira Rak B'Chitzein Gisabina. And in Bina, the breaking was only in the outer level of Bina. Leibachin's previous Bina, not in the inner dimension. But Kolshke B'Chinas HaChochma, and definitely the level of Chochma, the Ksiv Yamusa V'Leib Chochma. As it says, they die, but
so there was no spirit at all?
No spirit in Chochma.
Where's that written?
Yamusa V'Leib Chochma?
Yes.
It says V'Chochma Tichya, V'Ale'o. It's the same person. Chochma Techai Ba'aleh does say that. Remember? No.
Chochma Techaya Ba'aleh.
Yeah, and it also says Yamusu V'Leib Chochma. It sounds like it's a person.
Apostle?
It sounds
Yeah,
like
I think so.
You see it? Yeah, it sounds like it. I have to look it up. I don't know. I'm not sure. And therefore, the Gimel Rishonos are fundamentally a state of tikkun. Even in Tayu, they're not real breakage there. They're beyond. They're more bittul than the midas. In other words, in Tayu, where was the real sense of self, or so-called imbalance, was primarily in the midas, not in the mind of Tayu, so to speak. Only Chetzein Bina and Chochma altogether now. And that's why in B'chinas B'tzias. The Zayin Tachtenis Heim Hashanim B'chinas HaTeyu. And the Zayin Tachtenis in Atzilus is what was built from Tayu. V'alizeh B'chinas B'tzias. And they are in a state of self. In other words, what we spoke earlier, that Moichin in general is more internal, more bitla, Midas is more self. Even in Tayu, that's the way. That's why the breakage is not so much in Moichin, in Tayu, but primarily in the Midas of Tayu. So when Atzilus is Taka, the Tikkun of Atzilus is the Tikkun of all of Tayu. But the primary element where there's a break and a fix is in the Zayin Tachtein. It's not in the
Of Atzilus.
yeah, and of Tikkun.
So Atzilus.
It's
I
total-
thought it was all in balance.
This is
In
total-
balance in Atzilus.
Oh, after Atzilus
There's an imbalance in Tayu altogether, but the imbalance primarily expresses itself in the
before
Midas.
Atzilus, but after the Atzilus.
That's what he's saying. And Tayu,
After Ak. After Ak.
and not there are no Kalim, essentially.
There's no, so Tobu was as after Ak.
It goes Ak, Akudim, Nekudim, Fruit.
And then Tobu?
Tayu is Nekudim.
In Nikudi.
Tayu is Nekudim.
Is Nikudi.
That's why it's a lot.
Points.
That's high in Atzilus.
Ak, Akudi.
Sometimes Akudim and Ak are very close.
Ak, Akudi. Urudi. And then Nikudi.
And
Nothing is like that.
the Kudim and
Rumi.
Kudim is Tayu.
Yeah, the Kudim, yeah, okay.
Nikudim is the last one, right?
The Kudim is Tayu.
It's the last one. The Akudim, Ruim, and
Rudin is the lower.
That's
Rudin is Atzilus.
Kudim is Ak.
Sometimes it's connected to Ach, a little related, but it's
All
usually
about
lower.
Shepsula.
So, but total
And
is
so that- and Bria de Klolos is Ach, Tzir de Klolos is usually Akudim, or
Right.
Atik and Arich. And Rudin is Atzilus and Asir de Klolos.
What is Atzilus, the close?
Different answers. That's the spirit of Jesus. But Rudin the Kav.
Kudim, what is Kudim?
The sheep of Ava, Rudin is Atzilus, Tikkun.
That's the whole Kudim.
There's Rashi touches, so Rudin is the stripes.
About boys, stripes.
You have one spot, the spot is a Kudin. The Kudin is,
Many spots.
what? And the stripes. Stripes is like a combination of the feathers.
Scala.
There's different Perushim in a Kudin, in the Rashi and the other Radah. I wrote once a whole English article on it. A little piggy sheep.
That's what he saw.
We've done this before. I love him. How Yaakov would be Mamshel Levin Elyon without Kudin and Kudin Rudin.
I guess I'm.
There's a lot to learn, right?
Kudim.
You get it.
What's exactly a Kudim?
They're bound. All the
You're
items
sure
are
it's
bound.
okay now?
You know, okay.
Hey, we have okay, guys. We have a specimen.
No, he's
Shris Akel in the
he's the main specimen.
And the answer is always having tikkun. Thinking of Shris Akel.
He has it every day.
Yes, Shris Akel.
Oh, you skim with Rishonos.
First of all,
Hey,
Okay, that
primarily,
is fast. Shris Akel, the rest of the tikkun.
Amen.
Okay, that's good. That means you're climbing, man.
I'm trying. It's not easy.
but did he,
One thing Tayu is for sure. Let me put it to you in simple English. The purpose of Tayu is to get you out of your comfort zone. Let's do that. Tikkun is already Nissan Menucha.
What is Ace of Hate? Son of Yaakov.
Yes.
Chaos is not like order. So Tayu is a protest against comfort zones.
Wow. There's something
In
to.
other words, if Tayu was
Hey,
not
so that's
Tayu, what
some
would
good
happen
points.
would be Simpson happened, everybody's comfortable,
complacency.
nobody's complaining, nothing is breaking, everything's comfortable. That's all good. Okay, so there's nothing so different. Okay, I give them because tikkun that's not really good. I should do that. Agam delayed another question. Agam delayed is also the same man Mechin. Now, even though the birth and the revelation of emotions of feelings are from the mind, the mind weakens, causes, subjugates, and weakens and causes a weakness in the midas. In other words, it tames them. So here we're just speaking as if the midas are just, sense of self. So it's not a question, it's just a qualifier. And he goes, and it's not like it is in Tikkun, it's not like it's in Torah. The Sham Gam Ken Amidus Nimshachim Amech. But there also midas come from the Meichel, but Harizet Mechin's Maivel about. But there it only comes from the Chum's Maivel. It's immature. Remember I mentioned the example of the child that's having a tantrum. Why don't you just tell the child, use your mind, don't be so bad? Because the mind is not developed, because the midas are dominant and the mind is not controlled. What happens in Tikkun? In Tikkun, the midas are not going to create Shrius HaKelim, because the midas are being tempered and tamed by the Meichel. That's what he's saying. So there is a change that happens. That's what he's saying. The angel comes Sham Gam Ken Amidus Nimshachim Amech as if it's Maivel. Al B'Tikkun Ari Midas Klul in Tchila B'Meichel. But in Tikkun, the emotions are first encompassed in the mind, like we said before. Umehem Him Mizgal, and from there they are revealed. In other words, in Toyu, the mind there's a mind, but it's not evolved. It's not yet a smooth transition. The mind is directing and guiding and giving birth to the midas. It's far more wild. It's like a Wild West. It's like I said, the immaturity is there. Remember, it's early stage of development, so it's an immature, so to speak. Immature in human terms is immature like a child, but immature here would be not yet balanced. It's like the early stages of a It's like
Adam wrong.
even when they talk about solar systems as they
Fission.
develop, it's like when
Adam
you
wrong.
create a chemical reaction. At the beginning, there's a certain
Yeah.
instability. What is it called? They call it the wild radical, the free radical. There's a certain when you create a certain coalition of forces. Initially, there's a big imbalance, and it can go the wrong way until it finally coalesces and, so to speak, becomes a true what's it called, a true compound. So that's Toyu is like that. Toyu is like, you talk about the Big Bang, we call it the science of creation. Toyu is like this early stage, obviously not physically, but spiritually, where there's a lot of forces coming together, and they're confused, and there's a certain lack of harmony. Yeah, lack of order, and it can create a lot of chaos. Remember, this is Pasuk 2 in Chumash. Aretz Ha'iseh Toyu V'Vayim. Chayei Shechatnu Yad Then Vayihi Oyer. Okay, so this is what he's saying. He says,
But in Chumash,
okay, so that's the okay, now the way to read this is like this. That even though the birth and the revelation of the emotions come from the mind, that cause a subjugation and weakness in the midas, and not like it is in Toyu, where the midas also come, but it comes through Maiver. Maiver means only just passing through, not.
Right.
But in Tikkun, the midas come directly from the mind. Nevertheless, the conclusion, nevertheless, they're still a mitzvahs. So it's true in Tikkun, the midas are. He's asking a question: are the midas impacted by the mind? He says they are in Tikkun, much more than in Toyu. But still, they still are mitzvahs. Even when the midas are tamed, even when, let's say, the child now is no longer 3-4, you could say, or the child is a little older than the tantrum. Now, sit down, don't have a tantrum. To talk about it, it's still a person with midas. There's still a sense of self, but now the midas are far more mature. That's what he's trying to say. So it's still not moichen. The midas have not become moichen. They're still midas, but they're now mature midas, or relatively mature. Like we spoke with Yisrael Zuta. Remember the level where the midas start developing and maturity. That's what he's saying here.
but are you also saying that the Mochim also had a maturity level? My always.
Moichen is essentially on its own is always less selfish and less troublesome. Because it's not, there's no self involved, there's no I. So I tell you the Moichin didn't have a shvira. They're very intense, and they ultimately need a tikkun, but they're not affecting the emotions. The main thing is in that Tayu it says like this: the problem with the Moichin and Tayu, they're not impacting the midas, allowing them to break. That's the immaturity that we're talking about. So the breaking is not in the Moichin, but the breaking is in the midas because the Moichin can't impact.
Except for the Chatzoni Sabina breaks. You said the Chatzoni Sabina breaks.
No,
Yeah, the Chatzoni Sabina, but the Pnimi Sabina, Chachma don't.
I was always under the impression that they broke in total because they weren't big enough, mature enough to handle a mature
We'll
Mochim.
learn later.
You're saying that the Mochim was not mature there, so to speak?
Yeah, they're both at fault. We'll learn later, we'll learn 4 different combinations, whether it's the Eris at fault, the Kalim, or both. 4 different ways it can work. Be completely the Eris, completely the Kalim, partial Eris, partial. There's some different ways it can work. Yeah. Look, you see this constantly, by the way, look. I remember in my class, we had a guy that was extremely smart, but he was very frustrated. And he had a stutter, so he couldn't express himself well. So it was very clearly, his Eris were very strong. His
Much
Kalim was
verbatim.
small. He was unable to do it. He was to get really, upset and so on. That's one way. It could be other ways too. Sometimes it's the Eris are not that strong, but the Kalim are too. It's different. It's basically imbalances. Generally speaking, it's too much energy and too little container. The question is which is causing? Is it too much energy or too? Here with a child, you won't say it's too much mind.
Right.
That's right. It's too little container, and the mind, as it is, can't do anything with that container.
Right, so it's an immature mind also.
Yeah. But sometimes it's the other way around. There's too much energy. Like Talmidei Rabbi Akiva was the other way around. They had a lot of energy, and they didn't have containers to contain it, and they were all brilliant. They couldn't get along with each other. So there's not one way. I think it's later for sure he talks about several ways. I'll tell you.
That's why children learn very well with a song, because it captures the energy of Teyu and
even as the midas are encompassed in Moichin, they're also already in Mitzvah. So Commission is Bar Leil Pedek Nun Aleph, Kuf Nun Aleph. Like we learned before, chapter 151, beginning with Shveicha Tamale Bitnam. Shveicha means the concealed, the hidden, will fill the stomachs. Yeah. Like the secrets.
Something better, something we
Yeah. Yeah, so we fill our stomachs. That's
Tzvuncha Tamale Bitnam.
Yeah. I think here he also means that maybe like they're able to keep secrets inside of them.
Look in the
So what does he say there? What's the they're just talking about the midas. They're inside the belly. They're like in the mother's womb. Shem Chinas Mitzias Davar. That they're Mitzias Davar. V'Savusim Hamechnen Elias Bechinas Mitzias. And their creation from the mind is in order for them to become a Mitzias, an existence. Umamele Gam Haras Hamechnen Einer Ma'atzmas Hamechnen. And therefore, also the reflection of the mind is not from the essence of the Mech, which we learned also. Because you're dealing now, in other words,
they wouldn't be able to create another.
right. The whole idea here is taming the emotions. Etzem HaMeichin remains the domain of something detached from feelings. Here we're talking about how mind, so it goes both ways. The midas have a mitzias, and the mind that's affecting them is only the reflection of the mind, not the actual core intelligence. Well, canal Pedikul from the day, like we learned in the previous chapter, 155. What happened? Oh, in Iyuv Gamuri, the Bechinas Iyuv, as Ar Levad. Iyuv Gamuri, that Iyuv is the level, is only a reflection. Like Bechinas Atzmus Aved. The second term there, that Iyuv is only a reflection that manifests in the containers, not the core air. Right, this was the containers as an affected by them. Arzel, the Midas Lebina. However, this is all Midas Abina. The Shamim Chins Mitzias Acha Shayach Leim Mishen Sham Chins Ibur. He's going now back all the way to the Sol Sabbath Tfuna now. Wow, he's connecting it all back to that. I don't know if we should continue here. Maybe we should stop here. This is going to be a whole. This means I need to go back to those earlier chapters. I think we should stop by here. We'll stop by Chins Atzmus Saher. This is going to take 5 minutes. I want to go back. It's the whole. This is tying up the strings back to you know where. You know how far back we're going now. Where was Yisrael? Oh, that's farther back. Remember how far back? What is this Yisrael Sabbath?
No. It's Kuf Lamed Dalet, basically.
Yeah. He's going back all the way to chapter 134 now. Where are we now? We're 156. So 22 chapters now. He's connecting it all back to those levels. But we talked about it a lot. I think it's under control. What do you say?
The real place it starts is 130.
Which is summarize a lot of stuff. I like the Sundays.
The real place it starts is 130 when he says about between the Ovis and Matan Torah.
Oh, but this is going back to Yisrael Sabbath Tfuna. Obviously, Matan is even before that.
Right before that. That's where he gets into.
Yeah. He's tying up. This mimer is tying up that everything from back from 139. So basically, what he's going to be saying, and we'll stop here. He's connecting Yisrael, which is Eris and Kalim. More microcosmic is Meichen and Midas, basically, and that really creates that whole relationship with that whole Yisrael Sabbath. See the Eish says that Eish says it's Midas Shebe Chachma, Midas Shebe Bina. I'm ready to
bet on it?
It's very clear he's going back there. I'll explain it tomorrow. We'll go into it. Midas HaMechen for sure he's talking Midas Shebe Mechen. So that's if you remember Yisrael Sabbath 20, Yisrael Sabbath was Midas Shebe Chachma and so on.
So if it means Seba Chachma, then they're also
No. So it's going to be like this. Eris and Kalim. Gili Havli Gvul. And Gili HaGvul. Gvul is essentially Meichen and Midas. Then it's going to be Chachma and Bina. And then we're going to go to Chachma Stima and so on. So it's going to be the interface is developing. That's the essential picture here. If you want to have the thread, that's the thread. That's a key element to the whole flow. That's why it keeps going. Meichen and Midas, now I go back to this. all this, remember, Meichel Midrash is all about Atzilus for Biyah, Cyrus, and Asius, that whole thing. Yeah, good. Okay, so we'll start here. We did the first half of chapter 156, page 307, 308. Yes.